Lars Larson.
Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show, and welcome back to the Radio Northwest Network, serving the interests of the Pacific Northwest. I'm old enough to remember when the largest public works boondoggle in the Pacific Northwest was the badly named WHOOP system, the Washington Public Power Supply System, that tried to build half a dozen nuclear power plants. They failed miserably. They wasted a gigantic amount of money. But these days, the biggest single public works job in terms of dollars has to be the interstate bridge replacement. And this is try number 2 for building a new bridge across the Columbia River, an Interstate 5 bridge that connects Oregon and Washington and is the biggest single choke point between Canada and Mexico on Interstate 5. And I think they're going to fail the second time around, and I'm sure they may not waste as much money. They wasted almost $200 million the first time around, but this one is going south in a hurry. And now we found out something that is brand new news. Can you imagine spending $7.5 to $9 billion on a bridge to make a bridge that is exactly the same size as the existing bridge that it's replacing? But more importantly, the current bridge allocates 86% of the bridge to cars and trucks and buses. The new bridge will allocate less than half of the bridge surface to cars and trucks and buses. And to explain why that's happening and why the folks planning this boondoggle think it's a good idea, I've invited John Lee on, retired airline pilot, reporter, activist, candidate for the Washington House of Reps. Hey, John, welcome back.
Hey, Lars. Thanks so much for having me on. As you said, the sales pitch for replacing the I-5 interstate bridge is that it's the only stoplight for international commerce from Canada to Mexico on the freeway. And yet their solution will allocate over half of the surface of the bridge to bikes, pedestrians, and mass transit.
So only 46% to cars and trucks and such, right?
Yeah, exactly right. And unbelievably, Greg Johnson is catering to the bike and transit community, refusing to reduce or eliminate traffic congestion. What a sad waste of taxpayer money.
And why are they doing it this way, John? I know you've been following this a lot more closely than I have, but what explains why they would say we need a new bridge? It should be the same size as the old bridge, even though it's carrying a whole lot more traffic today than it did decades ago when it was built, when both of the spans were built. Why would they say, well, we're going to build a bridge the same size and a whole lot less of it is going to be available to cars, trucks, and buses?
Well, sadly, they're listening to political special interest, mainly from Portland. Unbelievably, Greg Johnson, the program administrator, said building more through lanes does nothing. He told this to 16 legislators from Oregon and Washington on Monday, and then he followed up saying, we want to accommodate folks who do not drive. And of course, the reality is that overwhelmingly people are using their privately owned vehicles to get to and from work, to use for running errands, going to the doctor and everything. And yet the political power of the bike community, of the No More Freeways community, seems to be carrying the day. It's a ridiculous waste of people's money.
I mean, even where the bridge sits. I mean, if you're in Seattle and you go across a bridge between one neighborhood and another one, at least you're going from somewhere to somewhere, and there might be an argument for making, additional, say, sidewalks for pedestrians or places for bikes to run. But in the case of Hayden Island, if somebody's riding their bike from, say, Southwest Washington onto Hayden Island, Jansen Beach, Tina and I used to live on a floating home on Jansen Beach years ago. After that, where do you go from there on a bicycle or on foot if you're going south? Because you'd go into a sort of a light industrial no man's land for a big period of time before you ever get back to a neighborhood, don't you?
Exactly right. And in fact, the Interstate Bridge program has admitted that nobody uses this for biking, walking, whatever. They show 0.2% of bridge crossings are what they call active transportation, people on bikes or pedestrians. There is absolutely zero need for any high-capacity transit or for bike and pedestrian facilities, number one. And number two, if you want to add something for bikes and pedestrians, you could repurpose the existing bridge that's lower. use it for local connections for those bicyclists, for pedestrians, and actually build an interstate freeway from Southwest Washington and Vancouver over to Marine Drive, and use that to actually move traffic, to move the cars and freight haulers in an expeditious manner.
And the current bridge has 84% of the bridge allocated to cars, trucks, buses, long haul, the whole 9 yards, 84%. And they're going to just simply shift all of that extra space on the bridge that'll be the same size as the old bridge. They're going to shift it over to pedestrians and bicycles who aren't using the bridge.
Actually, they're going to build an even wider bridge. They're saying 270 feet wide for the new structure, and then they're altering the percentage of that surface area in favor of bikes and pedestrians and mass transit. It's hugely frustrating. One aspect of this, one of the state legislators, Shelley Boshart Davis, asked, well, listen, if over half the structure is going to be for bikes and pedestrians and transit, are you going to charge tolls for those bikers and pedestrians? Are you going to charge transit for the cost of that portion of the bridge? That'd be over $4 billion that the non-cars and trucks would have to pay if it were equitable. And of course, they love to talk equity, but not when they're charging equity for pedestrians and bicyclists.
So there's not going to be any charge for bicycles and pedestrians, even though they're going to be using what promises to be a very expensive bridge. Let me ask you to hit one more time, or hit today, the cost. Right now, the official cost number is $7.5 billion, but that's up, I think, from the original $3.5 billion. And it's possible or almost certain that it's going to go much higher. What do we know about that?
Well, last December, Greg Johnson, the administrator, told the community that the price tag was going up, and he said he'd get to it later this year. We're now 6 months in, and there are no new cost estimates. Joe Courtwright estimated $9 billion. Currently, $2 billion of the $7.5 billion proposal is for the light rail component. Again, that's over a quarter of the whole thing for a mass transit service that nobody uses. So it's going to be outrageously expensive for the people. Oregon's out of money for their transportation projects, and yet they're saying the price tag's going up, and who knows where they're going to get the money. But the easy answer is most likely they're going to jack up the tolls that drivers will have to pay in order to cross the bridge. And of course, as soon as you put a price tag on crossing the I-5 bridge, everybody's going to divert to the free bridge, I-205, which is already congested, and it's going to make a nightmare.
And by the way, at $7.5 billion, how much money have they actually got committed to the project right now?
Well, it depends on who you talk to. They've got $600 million from the feds earlier this spring. Washington State has allocated $1.1 billion. Oregon alleges they've committed $1 billion, but in reality, they've only allocated specifically $250 million with an IOU for another $750 billion.
Sounds like they're at $2 billion and they need to get to $7 billion.